All right. Hey everybody, how y'all doing? Everybody's doing good? Awesome. So, Sophia, we're ready to go? Cool. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Felix Davila, and I am the manager of Young Adult Services for the United Pratt Free Library. And I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our guest today. Our guest today is a playwright, has written for the New York Times, host of The Moth in Philly, and was a senior staff writer for Elle, born in Baltimore, and is the writer of a new YA novel, Kings of Be More. I won't take up any more time, and I'm going to give him the floor. Please give a warm welcome and round of applause for R. Eric Thomas.
Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to be talking to you today. Like Felix said, my name is R. Eric Thomas. I am a Baltimore-born writer. I grew up in Upton, which is just off of MLK Boulevard, near the Pennsylvania Avenue Arts District. And I set this book in Baltimore, and you all have it in your hands, I believe. But I'll tell you about what it's about. I also want to say that as I would love talking to teen audiences. One of the reasons I wanted to write YA is because I think teen readers are some of the best readers. And so as we go through, if you have questions, there'll be a Q&A part at the end. But if you have questions, you have comments, you have thoughts, don't hesitate. Consider this a conversation. I'll just keep talking. But if you have something to say, that is also welcome. So what is this book about? Kings of Be More is set in Baltimore. It's set a couple of years from now, only because I wrote it during the first couple of years of the pandemic, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I needed to get them out of a space where they couldn't go anywhere. So it's set in Baltimore. Looks like we got another group coming in, so I'll catch them up. It's set in Baltimore in the summer, in June. A weekend pretty much like this. Focuses on two kids, Harrison and Linus. They're both 16 years old. They're best friends. They're both queer. They go to different schools here in the city. I made up the schools. They may be similar to schools that you know. One is a private school that's out in the county, and in the book it's called Plowshares. And Linus goes to a school here in the city that's named after Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Linus is, they're best friends. They're very different. Harrison is really sort of an introvert. He's always in his head all the time. But he's really into the theater program at school. And so he wants to be in the chorus. He doesn't want to be seen. Linus is more outgoing. He's cool. He's a big history buff. He likes to research things. Linus is moving away. And they find that out right at the very beginning of the book. And this really scares Harrison because Harrison wonders, well, what's going to happen to our friendship? Now, I know you can text, you can DM, you can communicate any way you want these days. But Harrison gets nervous that Linus will just start a new life. He's moving away to South Carolina, and he's worried that they're just going to lose contact. One of the things that this book is about, and maybe you've experienced this in your life already, is that there are sometimes you meet somebody who you want to be friends with, and you want to be friends with them forever. And maybe you feel that way now, and maybe you think, oh, of course we'll always be friends, But when you get separated by geography or you sort of change as people, it can get nervous. It can make you nervous that you're not always going to stay in each other's lives, and that's what happens to Harrison. So what does he do? He freaks out for about 50 pages, not knowing what he's going to do, not knowing how he's going to keep his friend in his life. And then he makes a plan. And he makes a plan based on a movie that I bet most of you have not heard of. Raise your hand if you've heard of the movie Ferris Buellers Day Off. Okay, all right, good for Ferris Bueller. So I'll tell you what the movie's about. So the reason he makes this plan based on this movie is because his father shows the movie at family. They have a family movie night. It's mandatory fun. They always have to watch a movie together as a family. Harrison hates it unless it's his pick, because his father's always showing old movies. like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which came out in, I think, 1985, which makes it old, apparently, which hurts my feelings, but it's just the truth. So what happens in Ferris Bueller's Day Off? What happens in Ferris? Ferris is this kid played by Matthew Broderick. He lives in Chicago. He doesn't want to go to school, and so he skips school, and he spends the entire day going around just this film as a black kid growing up in modern day Baltimore. And he thinks, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to take us on a Ferris Bueller day. I want to do everything that's fun and it's going to scare us in the city. But the fact of the matter is, the things that are possible for these kids are going to be a little bit different than what was possible for Ferris. Now that can be a negative. You can think of what people will expect of you or allow you to do as a negative thing. These are the limits to who I am. One of the reasons that I wanted to write this book, though, is to point out all the ways that who you are makes other things possible. One of the core ideas in this book is that these kids have a friendship and are surrounded by a community that is vibrant and creative and supportive and largely Black. And that's something you can find in a lot of books, but I wanted to add to those books because there's a lot of books that will tell you that being in a community, like the community I grew up in, like the different communities that you come from here in Baltimore, is a bad thing. It's going to set you up for failure in the future. And I don't think that's true. There are some books that I read when I was a little kid here coming to the Pratt Library that show you pictures of what a sort of vibrant, creative, loving, supportive Black community can be. I was thinking of, there's a book called A Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. It's a kid's book. But that is a picture of a city and a community that is based in possibility. So one of the things that I was thinking about writing this book, and one of the things that I encourage you to think about as you flip through and hopefully read this book, is all the possibilities that are in this book and in this city. I said it in Baltimore, one, because I think Baltimore is a really interesting place. And I grew up in Baltimore. And it had been a long time since I was a teenager in Baltimore. And I didn't do any of the things that these kids do in the book. But I find that the city, when you see pictures or see images of the city in movies or on the news, a lot of times it's only one side of the story. And a lot of times that story is negative. And that doesn't make any sense to me. And I was like, well, what can I do? I can write a book. I can put it in a bookstore. I can put it in a library, tell a different story about the city, which I think is really important. And I think that one of the things that I would love for you to take away from this day is that whatever your story of the city, whatever your story of your space in the city is, you can also put that out into the world. Maybe in a book, maybe a play, maybe even a TikTok, whatever you want, a poem, whatever form of expression that you have, you can show that this city has so many different stories in it. There's also a thing that people say when you're writing, write what you know, which is like kind of good advice, but kind of bad advice. I'll tell you a story. When I was in middle school, we had to write these stories. I don't remember what the prompt was, but we had to write little stories. And I wrote a story about a brother and a sister going on a train ride on the Amtrak train. And in the middle of the story, they're sitting on the train, and the flight attendant comes over to ask them if they want any drinks. I don't know if you've been on an Amtrak train, but they don't have flight attendants because Amtrak trains are not flights. I didn't know that. I don't think I'd been on a train at that point. If I did, I didn't remember. And I was like, my teacher read the story, and she was like, Eric, you should probably write what you know. And I took that to mean like, oh, don't write about trains. But that's not really what it meant. It meant, one, research. I could have looked up what it was like to go on a train. I could have gone on a train. But also, write what you know internally is really the bigger takeaway there. So it's not so much about getting the facts right or wrong. If you want to write a story about a train where there's flight attendants, sure, The train goes to space, the flight attendants come over, they offer you a drink, everybody's happy. But it's really more about writing the world as you see it, writing through your perspective. And so that's what I tried to do. The book starts, who knows? The book starts at the end at a sort of unlikely place for a fun little young adult novel to start. It starts in a cemetery. Do you know, raise your hand if you know the Baltimore Cemetery. It's at the very end of North Avenue, at North and Greenmount. Okay. So I find that place so fascinating. Has anybody ever been inside that cemetery? Baltimore Cemetery? It's Baltimore Cemetery. Greenmount's a little further down, but yeah, Baltimore is at the very end. Yeah. So I find that place so fascinating. I remember when I driving down North Avenue, you see it at the end of North Avenue, and it sort of rises up. And as it says in the book, it rises up like there's a hill, but it rises up like it's like a sleeping dragon with all these little shells across its back. And one of the reasons I said it there, set the opening scene there, is because one, I wanted to give these two kids a place where they could be away from all the sort of busyness of their lives, and also above the city, be able to look at the city as a whole. And it's a place that sort of you may not think, oh, this is a place where two kids are going to hang out. I'm going to read you just a little bit from that beginning portion. One second. Let me start. Baltimore Cemetery was a huge, old-timey hillside burial ground packed to bursting with elaborate historical grave markers, and tucked among them, two 16-year-olds pretending to be annoyed with each other. Their trip, as always, was Linus's idea. The main purpose of the space aside, Linus's affinity for the cemetery wasn't morbid. They always came in daylight, and Linus was primarily interested in the space between the dates on each marker and what happened within it. To Harrison's mind, the thing that kept them coming back was the fact that it didn't feel creepy or forbidding, but rather that it was one of the most wide open, awe-inspiring spaces they'd ever encountered. Here amongst the stone and the crows and those who belonged only to history, they felt like they stumbled into a dazzling new perspective on a city they'd always called home. Now this was living. There's no place like this, Harrison conceded, still refusing to acknowledge that he was in the presence of a comedy genius. Linus had tried to make a joke before this. Linus thrust his arms out now and spun in a slow circle, very sound of music, except these hills were definitely not alive. If the hills were alive, he and his friend would be in some trouble, and the next bus wasn't coming for another 25 minutes. Linus plopped himself down onto a patch of grass and gazed up at the 12-foot blue-gray angel standing on top of a gravestone. Harrison stepped over Linus's legs, wandered around the base of the gravestone, and made his way to the asphalt driveway. He cast a look back. Linus was the one staring up the clouds now, not a care in the world, it seemed. You going somewhere? Linus called. No, just nowhere. I'm still here. Harrison couldn't stop moving, fidgeting, futzing with his glasses. He didn't know why. He wasn't going anywhere, but he sure was in a hurry to get there. Harrison turned and faced the horizon. The cemetery rose up at the end of flat North Avenue like it was built upon the back of a poorly disguised dragon. From the top, you could see all the way down to the harbor south of them, all the way to the tall, narrow houses of West Baltimore where Linus lived. North to the slightly nearer neighborhood with the wider, shorter homes where Harrison lived, and out to the docks and highways in the east, through which the city dribbled out into the water and rivulets. If it weren't, a final resting place, Harrison would have thought it was rather serene, like a statue garden. Or maybe that was why it was serene. He didn't know. It unnerved him, but the fact that it didn't unnerve Linus gave him license to see it in a different way. No shade to all the souls gathered here, but they did have a favorite amongst all the statue-like gravestones. It was the one against which Linus was leaning, a tall angel atop a grave from 1860. She had a bowed head, and from one raised hand, she pointed an index finger skyward. The first time they'd seen it, Harrison said, "She looks like she's at a party going, 'Yes, they're playing my song.'" Linus had laughed so hard he fell over. They dubbed her DJ Turn It Up. Though, am I going to keep reading? Who can say? I'll read one more paragraph. Though the cemetery was open to the public, that summer it felt like it belonged only to them. An old station wagon sat by the gate most days, and initially the boys held their breath, waiting to be chased away as if their mere presence was evidence of a crime. But no one ever came. A rarity, a respite. And so they would take the bus from the middle of the city to trek up the hill more and more frequently. They came to wander and to talk and to gaze into the horizon from the only place where they could find it in every direction. So that's how we begin. We begin with them sitting in their special place, real place that exists. The statue that I described with the angel pointing her finger up, she's right at the very front of the cemetery. You can go find it. And while a lot of the places in this book are not actual Baltimore locations, there's a house party at a place that doesn't exist yet. I'm trying. I'm like, well, if this book sells well, then I can make it happen. There's a thrift store that they go to change clothes called Maybe This Time, but doesn't exist yet. But then there's a lot of other places that are in the real world, that are in our world. But it starts in the cemetery, and it branches out from there. One of the things that I'd like for you to think about is, a cemetery obviously has a purpose, and that purpose is often a very sad one. But a cemetery, like the city, like all of us, has a bunch of different stories within it, and can be seen in a bunch of different ways. And so when these kids sit on top of the hill and look out at all the different directions of Baltimore, they see all the things that it could be. One of the other things that was really important for me in working on this book was, how do I put this? Was giving a sense of life and adventure to these kids and to their day. And so they go to a bunch of different locations that all have a sort of kind of strange magic to them. And one of those locations is this library. And that was really important to me, one, because in every book I write, I try to shout out the central branch of the library because I just really want them to like me. When librarians like you, things go really well in your life. And two, because this place was really important to me when I was growing up. When I was a senior in high school, I did a independent study project where I came and I was doing independent study for writing. I was trying to write short stories and sort of other creative things. And so I would go to one library, I believe it was in Highlandtown, and I'd meet with a librarian there, and she would sort of read and edit some of my work. She was also a writer. And then I would come here to the African American collection, which was down the hall. I believe it still is right down the hall. And I would just sit in the shelves all day long, and I would just read from there. One of the things I love about libraries, and maybe you've experienced this, maybe you have this feeling as well, is that you can find anything that you want in here. And you can find any version of yourself, you can find any story, you can find anything you want. And I found that just down the hall. And so I wanted to pay tribute to that, but I also wanted to pay tribute to the fact that this place is like really pretty. And it sometimes a library is just like a nice building where there's books. And sometimes it's this place. So later in the book, where is it? Later in the book, two characters who are side characters, they're both named Aperna. They come to the central branch of the library. And one of the reasons that they're at the central branch of the library is because Linus and Harrison are supposed to be there, but they're off on their adventure. And so they leave their phones with Harrison's friend Aperna, and so that their parents, can track their location using the phones, which is not something I recommend you do, but that's what they do. So, you do what you need to do. And then they go off on their adventure. So Aperna, who is Harrison's best friend, is sitting here in the library, and she runs into one of her classmates who they call Cool Aperna. There's two Apernas in the class. One of them is Aperna, and one of them is Cool Aperna. So sorry to that, Aperna. So this is from page 209. And Aparna's sections in the book are labeled as stage manager's reports. She's running the show, so she's the stage manager. She writes, all I needed to do was sit at the library until the time when Harrison's sister was due at the hairdresser. Then I'd drop his bag off at his house and I'd be done. This was, in concept, the home stretch. But in my planning, I hadn't anticipated having company. Cool Aparna had gotten to the harbor by car, her mother's, and she insisted on driving us to the library. Music came roaring to life as soon as she turned on the engine, and she made no attempts to turn it down again. She lowered the roof all the way, threw her sweatshirt in the back seat, and told me to put my stuff literally anywhere. The car had an eggshell interior with oxblood leather seats. It was spotless. I put the backpack on the floor behind my seat. The backpack is where Harrison and Linus's phones are. They step into the library, and Cool Aparna says, why does this look like a Versailles for books? Versailles is a palace in France. And if you Google Versailles and look at the downstairs of this library, they look the same. The central branch is a huge block-long stone building with a light-filled O-shaped atrium in the middle. It did, I guess, look like a Versailles for books. Are you asking that or just saying, I asked. Aparna, Cool Aparna said, I've been in buildings before. I was just making a joke. We sat down at the table near an older woman with a salt and pepper bob. She had a closed book in front of her and was crying quietly. Of course, Cool Aparna approached her. Are you okay? Cool Aparna asked. The woman looked up and smiled at Cool Aparna through her tears. She chuckled a little and wiped her eyes. Yes, the woman said, it's just the book. She held up the cover. I'd read it before. I had also cried. I just got to the most moving section and had to take a little breather. What's it about? Cool Aparna asked. Very quickly, she and the woman became best friends, laughing about the book and the plot and crying over something that didn't happen. I guess it didn't matter that I had also read the book. After the woman left, Cool Aparna hummed as she typed on her phone. She took a photo of the cover of the book. She scrolled through videos. She commented on many of them. Then she spoke to me without looking up. So, what now? Oh, you're talking to me, I said, before I could stop myself. Am I still here? Amazing. Cool Aparna stopped typing and raised her eyes to meet mine. You pissed? Sorry, I'm just being a brat. I should eat the protein bar in my backpack. Cool Aparna was quiet for a while, but she didn't take her eyes off me. What was annoying about her was that she was popular, but not dumb. It's really nothing. I read the book that you two were talking about, but I didn't want to intrude. Aparna, that's outrageous. I cannot believe this. We could have had a book club. She grabbed my hand. I gently removed it. Why are you hanging out with me? I said. Do you not want me to? Just answer the question, please. You invited me. What? I absolutely did not. You said you were going to the library and then to your friend's house. That's not an invitation, I said too loudly. I feel like you're overthinking it. We ran into each other, which is totally random, and now I'm having so much fun, she said. Why is this weird for you? I don't know. We never really speak, and we don't hang out. Oh my God, Aparna. We talk all the time at rehearsal, she said. She reached up and yanked at her ponytail to tighten it. Not the same, I said. Plus, it just seems a little weird to be suddenly hanging out after years of being defined by our differences. I don't get it. You're cool, Aparna. Her smile dropped. I continued. And I am, by definition, not cool, Aparna. I don't believe in hierarchies, she said. Well, that's good for you, I said. We were both quiet for a while. I turned my focus to the life of the library. I usually try to watch things until I can come up with a way of understanding a place. So that's a little shout out to the library. There used to be, I'll tell you one thing about writing a book. In the first draft of this, there was a very long section where they meet a bunch of different librarians and they're just talking about this fictional book that I just made up. And my editor was like, what are we doing here? Can we get back to the plot? And I was like, but it seems really interesting. And the library is very pretty. So they had to cut it down. That's the thing. Sometimes you have to lose some of the things that you really care about in your writing. When I was writing this, I wrote this book mostly from November of 2020 to January of 2021, which is, obviously, as you recall, a period when we were still largely, or I think probably completely in lockdown. And it was not summer. This book is set in summer. This book is set in a time where these kids are going everywhere they want to go. They're back in school as and not doing virtual school. So a lot of what I had to do was kind of imagine the future. I had to imagine the way that we are going to get to live, hopefully, now, but also much more hopefully in the future a little bit more. Also, the central library was the central branch was being remodeled. Maybe that's not true. I can't remember, but I didn't go in because you weren't going in anywhere. So I was like, I would drive around the city and I would just go to the places where the book events would take place. And I would just imagine myself into the future. And I would take the things that I knew, that I remembered about being in these spaces before, and then I try to sort of bundle them into sort of a brighter, more vibrant, more hopeful package and throw them into the future. And I did that with the library. I did that with the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where they go in the book. And I did that with the pool in Druid Hill Park. Has anybody been to the pool in Druid Hill Park? Raise your hand. It's a really lovely space. And I really like the pool. And if you haven't been this summer, it's really great. They've done a really big remodel on it. There's slides and sprinklers, and it's nice. It's a nice pool. I recommend it. And I knew that I wanted the whole cast of characters to end up at the pool at a certain point in the book. I think the pool is really interesting. If you don't know the history of the pool, there used to be 2 pools in Druid Hill Park, and they were segregated. And one pool was slightly smaller and only for Black residents in Baltimore. That pool was filled in with cement and dirt and grass, but you can still see on the edges where you could climb in. So you can go and find that other pool, which is sort of, I think, stands as a testament to the fact that like history changes, but it doesn't go away. But everyone's allowed in the main pool now, which is a beautiful thing. And while I was writing this, it was January, obviously, so the pool was empty. But they were also building the pool that we have now. And so I said to myself, great, if they're going to end up at the pool, they're going to end up in the pool of the future. And so fortunately, they had like illustrations of what the pool was going to look like on the fence and on the website. And so the pool that we find in the book is that pool. And I was really hoping that they didn't change the design, because then I published a book and people were like, what is this? I went by the other day. It looks pretty similar. So I want to read one final part, and then I don't know what time it is. So I'm also want to make sure that I'm cognizant of the time. I'm going to read one final part, talk a little bit about that. And then if there's questions or comments or anything, I want to open it up for that. So where are we? We're going to start at 3:04. They're at the pool, and I've described it in a way that is, in fact, accurate to what happened in the future. Linus is off doing something else. Harrison's at sort of this kind of like low moment. He's not quite sure how he feels about himself, but he feels like the day was kind of not a success. So we're in the middle of the page. Harrison pressed his toes into the pebbly concrete at the edge of the pool and watched Phil swim. By the way, I'm going to stop. Phil is Philodendra Trong. She's a classmate of Linus's. And so what you're going to hear in this section is Harrison like really not feeling at home in the day, at home in his body, at home in the world. So he's watching Phil swim. He was struck by how much power she was harnessing. Each loop of her arm was tactical, each kick another jolt of force. She really did have sea legs. She hit the wall and pulled herself up for air. She slicked back her hair and spotted Harrison above her. She blew some stray water from her mouth and smiled. "Want a race?" she said. "I'm not that great a swimmer." "Well, then you'll lose," she said simply. "Somebody has to." Harrison chuckled at this, and then a new thought. It was like Phil's voice echoed in his head. Somebody has to lose. And then inside himself, another voice replied, "Not me, not today." He sat down on the edge of the pool and plopped into the water in the lane next to her. "Now we're talking," Phil said. Harrison hooked an arm into the side and pressed his feet against the wall to keep himself up. "What do you think? Up and back? Simple?" she said. "Okay," Harrison said. "What kind of stroke?" "Who has time for all kinds of acrobatics? I do a forward crawl, one hand over the other. You do whatever you want." She flipped around to face the lane. "Ready?" Oh, this was happening now. Harrison, in his solo practices at school, had grown accustomed to doing the arms from the breaststroke, reaching out and splitting the water in two, but kicking as he would in a forward crawl. He briefly wondered if Phil or anyone else who was watching, no one else was watching, would find it weird. But then he remembered what she had just said. Do whatever you want. He raised his feet to the wall to kick himself off. You want to take your shirt off? Phil said. Did she mean in general or in this moment? Because the answer was no either way. I'm good, Harrison said. All right, count of three, Phil said. She counted to three and then shoved off from the wall in a burst of limbs and water and noise. Harrison pushed off right behind her. He liked this part the best, the beginning. He liked the power that was hiding itself in his legs, waiting to send him sailing through the water. He lifted his arms up from his sides, then pitched them forward. He couldn't see Phil. His field of vision was all bubbles. He kicked his legs, trying to keep his feet underwater as he'd been taught. He put his arms back down, then up the length of his body, and then out. He felt the air bubbles racing up the sides of his shirt. He reached the other end just before Phil. She flipped underwater and shot in the opposite direction, sending a blast of bubbles toward him. The flipping was always the hard part for him. He hit the wall with his hands, turned around, and launched himself off again with his feet. Phil was so far ahead of him. His hands kept getting caught in his shirt. He was aware of every part of his body as he moved through the water, his legs, his skin, his stomach, his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to concentrate on just moving his body, just being in the water, but his thoughts drifted. He heard the sound of blood pumping in his ears, and he thought how weird it was that people talked about their hearts when they talked about love. My heart is so full, it's bursting, they declare in a musical before breaking into song. He never thought about his actual heart, the thing that pressed against his ribcage, that sent blood racing through his veins, that vibrated inside of him. This was the thing that was keeping him going, losing the race at this rate. What did it have to do with love? With a feeling that wasn't physical and maybe wasn't anything at all? The heart, he thought as he hit the wall and pulled himself up, gasping, is a lumpy loaf sitting in our chest, minding its own business. It does not have an opinion on love. Phil was already bobbing in the water when Harrison crested. Nice job, you're fast, she said. He pulled himself up on the side, water pouring off of his shirt, and dribbled into the pool. He tried to catch his breath. Thanks, he said. Can I ask, why are you planning to live on a boat after high school? Phil looked puzzled. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was obvious. I want to be free. Harrison twisted the end of his shirt to wring out the water. He felt so heavy with it soaked. It was dragging him down. Do you want to race again? He said. Sure, Phil said. I can do this all day. She set herself up and waited for him. Harrison pulled at the bottom edge of his shirt. He looked around the pool again. No one was watching this very exciting race between two high schoolers. No one was just standing around waiting to offer their thoughts on his body, on what he should eat, on when he'd grow into it, on strategies for building muscle or burning fat or whatever, on whether somebody he didn't even know would like it or wouldn't like it. Nobody was noticing them at all. And this state of being was usually a comfort to Harrison, though he knew he sometimes used it as a cavern to crawl inside and make himself smaller. He didn't want to do that. Not here. Not now. He spent the entire day trying to prove to Linus how much he meant to him. He thought he'd succeed. He wasn't sure. But if he hadn't, it hadn't been by making himself less. Harrison raised his shirt up and lifted it over his head. Because it was wet, it clung to him at various spots, a needy shirt. The air felt great on his skin. He dropped the shirt onto a pile on the cement. He was just a person wearing person clothes, albeit fewer, in a pool full of people in person clothes, with bodies and lumpy loaves pumping blood in their chests. And Harrison hoped, love bursting out of some strange and mysterious place. So I'll stop it there. One of the things I'd love for you, if you do pick up the book, or even if you don't, I'd love for you to take away, again, is the idea that there are so many different stories in this city, so many different ways of being a person in Baltimore, a person in the world, being yourself, fully yourself in the world. The thing that motivates this book, the thing that drives Harrison to do all the crazy things he does in this book, is that he has found a best friend who he wants to keep in his life. He has what we call platonic love, meaning it's not romantic. It is a love, it's not familial. It's a love for just another person that is just love. We have the capacity to love all kinds of people that we meet. and we have the capacity to love our friends. And I think that's a really special thing about life. And it's a thing that makes life really fun sometimes. It makes life worth living and can make the harder parts of life much easier. And that's what Harrison finds. And I hope that's what you find. I think we've got some time for questions, comments, thoughts. So if you have something that you want to share, or you want to ask, please go ahead and raise your hand. There's mics on the side. You can come on down. And I think, and Felix has a mic as well. So
Yeah, I was just going to say, anybody has any questions, feel free to come to the mics on either side, and you'd be able to ask whatever you'd like to ask, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. Okay. Welcome. Mm-hmm.
There was something wrong. Okay. Well, I am in the process. It's nonfiction.
Oh, great.
Okay. So I was very curious in your fiction writing. What is your background? And of course, you're writing for an age group that you're far away from. How is that? How is that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is my third book. My first book was a memoir in essays, and the reason that I was able to publish that, I wrote a humor column for about 5 years for Elle magazine, and so I got some attention for that, and I got an agent through that, and then I spent a good amount of time sort of working on these essays that were about feeling of otherness in my own life, and the idea of like sort of moving to the center of the page in your own story. So I wrote that book, and one of the essays in that book was about a friendship I had with a young woman in high school, and we're just very good friends, and I loved her very much. And the editor of this book read that essay, and she said, "I think you have a young adult novel in you." And one of the things that it was kind of kismet, because I love young adult novels. I've read them when I was a young adult, when I was a teen, and I still read them. And I've been thinking about a different kind of novel, a young adult novel that was about these two teens who like follow a pop star on Instagram and have this like, sort of obsessive fan site about this pop star, and then they use it to like unlock a mystery. And maybe I'll write that one day. It didn't really work out. I was pitching it to my agent, and she was like, "Let's see what else you have." But this idea of this friendship from high school really had legs. And so when I think about trying to write for a demographic that I'm not a part of, one, I guess spend a lot of time like just talking to other teens. We're talking to teens. Teens like me. And just finding out what they're. The logistical things. How do you communicate with each other? What do you feel like? What are your questions about the world? And then I did a lot of thinking about who I was as a teenager. And I believe so strongly that empathy is the strongest motivator of any story. So when you write your own story, you write nonfiction, if you write memoir, you write fiction. It's all about creating this empathetic connection where for me the biggest thing in this book was not that these kids were 16 years old and living in 2023 24 so much as that they were humans, and that they experienced love, and they experienced fear, and they experienced pain, and I think one of the things that is great about YA is that it recognizes that sometimes we discount teenagers and say like, "Oh, you don't know yet. You don't know what life is like." And I think many of the people gathered here would say, "No, I do know. I know what's going on." So.
It sounds wonderful. The book sounds great.
Thank you.
I don't really have people in that age group in my life directly, but I came because I wanted to hear about it and get the book for 15-year-old neighbors.
Oh, great.
15-year-old who's grown up in hear all of what you said about it. And I did think in terms of, and because I started, wow, friendships are really important at that age, and the changes and that kind of love, I haven't thought about that in over years.
Yeah.
But as you were speaking, I did, and then, it's a great theme, and the empathy, because I write about animals.
Okay.
Okay, and that's a whole other kind of bond and the involvement.
Oh, yeah.
It's very empathetic.
Yeah.
And our connection. So I hope you sell like 1 million copies.
Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that.
Quick question: what high school did you go to?
What's that?
What high school did you go to?
I went to the Park School. It's in Baltimore County.
Baltimore County. Say it again, please.
So the Park School in Baltimore County. That's like the Baltimore question. Like what high school did you go to is like the people are like, I don't want to know about college. I don't know anything else. It's just the high school question. Yeah. So I went to Park out in Brooklynville. Oh yeah. Other questions? Yeah. This book. Okay, there's 2 phases. One, I spent maybe about a month and a half. No, actually, I spent about 2 months, like working on like the plot structure. So I had a big board in my office where I just sort of wrote down the events that would happen, but I also sort of wrote down what each character wanted in each section of the book and what was keeping them from it. Because the way that you sort of build a story is like somebody wants something, somebody is keeping them something, or somebody is keeping them from getting it, and they have to either overcome it or fail. And so at every point in the story, there's either an overcoming or a failure for both of these characters. So I did a lot of sort of graphing it out. And then I took a little bit of a break in December. So that was like October, November. And then it took about 6 weeks to write, which is fast for me, for like a whole book. But I left my job. And so my whole job was this book for the month of January. And then they asked me to do a rewrite, and that took about a month. So all told, I think about like 3 months. But also it was like a year, over the course of a year.
So we actually had a question online.
Oh, yay.
So I'm going
Hello.
to ask that one.
Yeah.
So someone asked, what would you tell your teen version of yourself, especially having published this book?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I think I'd tell the teen version of myself, like, I don't know, pay attention to the things you care about, because like they may seem silly, but they will matter to other people. They'll matter to yourself. You'll be able to write a whole book about a city that you live in and a kid who likes theater just like you do. Yeah, I don't know. What else would I tell my teen self? I don't know. Don't take statistics. I did not do very well in statistics. I liked it. I thought it was really fun. I took all these classes in college and high school that I was like, I find this fascinating. And then I wouldn't do well in them because I was just like, this is interesting. I took this astronomy class in college because I just thought stars were pretty. And they were like, they want you to learn physics for astronomy. And I was like, oh no, I think I just want to talk about constellations. And so that was really hard. So I don't know. I think I tell my I think I tell my teen self, maybe don't take statistics, but also like follow your passion, and know that in the ways that you feel weird, they will be appreciated. Or if they're not appreciated, you'll stop caring. So.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, cool. So my name is Helen, and I just wanted to ask, you briefly mentioned how you started writing this at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, kind of through finding the story, through actually physically writing it, how did you go from kind of the low of the pandemic, the lockdown, to finding this story that sounds so hopeful and fun?
That's a great question. It was there were times that writing this book was a real respite for me, where I was like, I'm imagining a summer where that is all about freedom and joy, and I'm imagining a life. But you know what it is? I think it was the core of this book was that I wanted to imagine a life for these 2 Black queer kids who that is ultimately joyful and that it's ultimately free. And so the core of the book was already, pandemic or not, was already creating a world that is possible, but isn't always seen and isn't always readily available. And I was like, these two kids in Baltimore are going to, nothing, there are a couple of events where things don't go their way, but this isn't a book that ends in tragedy. And so I was like, great. So if we are creating a future, then it sort of doesn't even matter what the present is. And so there were some instances where I would drive around, not being able to get out of my car, and I'd be like, one day they're going to be here, and they won't be wearing a mask, and they won't be dangerous. One day they'll be in this library. One day there'll be a Pride Festival here in Charles Street again. And so I just sort of kept imagining that. One of the interesting things, I really started to get into my groove of writing first week of January of 2021. On January 6th, I woke up and I was like, let me get to writing. Yeah, it was not as successful a day as I thought it was going to be in terms of writing. And I looked at my I have a tracker. I stopped writing for a couple of days after that because it was very scary, and very hard to feel hopeful. And then I remembered one of the core parts of this book is that there's this song that is on the radio that Harrison hates and Linus loves. It's called Press the Sky Higher. And it's described as this sort of victory anthem that's sung by the four judges of The Voice. And the idea, and it's not really explicit in the book because I didn't want to spell it out, but the idea is that it's a song that was written after all of the things that we are currently experiencing have been sort of triumphed over. So rampant white supremacy and the pandemic and all the other things. And they're like, we wrote a song. And so I just thought to myself, I was like, okay, you are writing to a future where all that went wrong on that day has been made right. And I think every book is in a way, it's sort of an attempt to write a little bit of heaven. And so that's what I tried to do. So that's a great question. Thank you.
I loved hearing you read your book.
Oh, thank you.
And I was wondering what your thoughts were on translating it to an audiobook, because the way you read it is probably the way you were imagining the characters.
It is. Yeah. Well, it's available in audiobook. I didn't read this one. I read my first book in audiobook, and I'm reading my next one. But this one, because there's so many different characters, we wanted to hire someone who's an actual actor. And it's interesting because he does a great job on the audiobook, and actor named Torian. But we hadn't met, and so he just read the book. And so there's two characters who in the audiobook are British, and I have no idea where that came from. And I was listening, I was driving, I was listening to it for the first time I bought it. They didn't send me a free copy, which was rude. So I bought my own audiobook. I'm listening, and all of a sudden, this character, Fitzhugh Quatch, shows up, and he's like, hello, mate. And I was like, excuse me? Who is this guy? So it was very fascinating. So it was interesting because there are times where I listen and I'm like, oh yeah, we're totally in sync. And there are times where I think, oh, he's adding something on top, which I think is also really cool. So I think I've got another novel in the works, and I think I might want to just hang out in the booth for that one and just say maybe not British, so we'll see.
When you were a kid, did you think about making a book?
Did I think about writing a book, you say? Yeah, I did. I thought about it a lot. I would come to this library branch. My mom was here, and my mom would bring me to this library and to the Woodlawn Library. We would go every week for a lot of my life, and I would borrow as many books as I can. And I would, read them or have them read to me. And I would think about how does this happen? How does this get out into the world? And then I would write little stories. And for much of my life, it was just sort of that question: how does this get out into the world? And I would just write little stories. And then when I went to high school, I took a fiction writing class, and so I wrote sort of longer short stories. And went to college, and I wrote little short stories. And then I kept kind of writing, but that was all 20 years ago. And this book, this is my first novel. So what I say that to say that sometimes you don't know what you're working toward until you get there. And so I didn't know that I was working toward trying to write a book. I knew that I knew that I wanted to be in a library. That was really important to me, but I didn't know how you got there. But the way I got there is by continuing to write and continuing to sort of try and create. So yeah, I always thought about it.
School inspired you to write a book?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I loved English class. English was my favorite class, English and theater. And so in English class, you get to read, I'd read, and I don't know, I'm very curious if actually, I'll ask you after I say this. I read, some of these books that have stayed with me for the rest of my life. I read Lord of the Flies in English class. I read Their Eyes Were Watching God. We read Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, and they've stayed with me. And I thought, oh, if you can not only read a book, but you can sit in a classroom and learn about why they think of this book as a good book, what this book does for the world. That's kind of amazing. I'm curious, what books are you all reading in English class? Just call them out. What's that? Comics? Okay, what comics? Marvel. All right. Well, I think that's really cool. Well, I mean, hopefully your English teacher is pointing out that comics follow a really traditional structure of storytelling. And superhero mythology superheroes are very similar to Greek myths and other sorts of classic literature. That's great literature. What else are you reading in English class? Anyone else? Nobody's reading English? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Things Fall Apart. I didn't read that till I was in college. That's a really good. What else? Someone give me one more. Sure. What are you reading? Yeah. Comics. Cool. I think that's great. If I could draw, actually, you know what? I'm just remembering we had a comics class in high school, and I was not very good at it. I didn't quite understand what I was doing, but I think I'm glad that you're able to read those because you can see that all these things are connected. The comics are connected to the way we tell stories and the way we understand ourselves and we understand what's good and what's bad. And they get made into movies, which are just another form of storytelling. It's all the same.
Hi.
Hi.
So you mentioned this was your first novel,
Mhm.
and I was just wondering, like, what kind of mentorship did you receive throughout the process? And yeah.
Yeah. No,
And,
that's
like, what kind of mentors, if someone wanted to write a book, like, would make sense to have?
That's a great question. So I'm friends with a number of. I became one of the great things. I guess one of the positive benefits of the pandemic was that it forced me to sort of reach out to people online, and so I became friends with a lot of authors online. And we would have Zoom conversations, and a lot of them were either authors who had written written more books than I have. Or written YA specifically. I was very sort of eager to get that kind of input. Or writers who were also working on their books. So sometimes you need people who you can just be like, is this a stupid thing to do with my life? And sometimes you need people to say like, you need to finish this deadline and you actually, you can go further with this, or you should take this part of this away. The other part that was really helpful with this book is the team at my publisher. It's a team of editors and editorial assistants who all give really specific notes along the way. And then they bring in what we call sensitivity readers, where they are readers who are reading just to make sure that a book doesn't portray a particular identity in a way that's going to be harmful. And I specifically looking for a couple different identities to sort of read for. And the readers, they wrote these 4-page feedbacks on the book, which were really helpful and really great, and really helped me to shape the book. So it's mostly other writers online, and then the publisher itself. Your question kind of prompts me to think what is also a really good framework of mentorship. Writing is such a solitary thing. One of the things I try and do now, as I'm struggling to finish my next book, is I meet up in a coffee shop with another friend, and it's not even about what we're writing. It's just the fact that we are doing this thing together and we are accountable to each other. So that's also really good. I think that's helpful. Thanks for your question. Yeah. Hi.
Question, Eric.
Yeah.
I know this year you had 2 pretty amazing plays that also premiered here in Baltimore.
Yeah.
How's your writing process different when you're writing a play versus when you're writing a book like King's?
Oh, that's a great question. So as just mentioned, I'm also a playwright. And with plays, I'm much less sort of regimented. Like one of the plays shorter. I think this book is 90,000 words. And most plays are around 20,000, 23,000. So I want to sort of live in the space of the play. Like I've got an idea for a new play that I'm trying to keep out of my head because I don't have time for it. But I was like sitting in my backyard and I was just talking to myself, the 2 characters having this fight. And I was like, oh, that's good. Oh, well, that's funny. Oh, that's good. That's good. just crazy. So that's very much the experience of writing a play, the sort of like living in the space of the world, jotting a lot of things down on like little notepads and just sort of like, it's like a magpie just pulling it all together. With a book, because this was my first novel, and I think I'm doing the same thing with my next nonfiction book, because it's like you don't want it to fall apart in the middle. It feels like it's making a cake, or like a cake, because that'll fall. I was like, what's that thing that falls, And so I do a lot more structure, and I try and do a lot more structure in my days. And I'm just sort of like, this is what I'm writing today. This is what needs to happen, and this is how we hit it. With a play, I really don't do that. Maybe I should, but it feels like being organized with playwriting feels like antithetical to the process. Whereas with a book, I'm like, there's no way. I don't know. Some people just sort of sit down and just write, and I got to know what my assignment is every day. So that's worked. I mean, it's worked so far, so we'll see. It's a great question. We're done on time.
Yeah, we're good on time. If there are no other questions, I was going to ask. Oh, one more.
Yeah.
Where did you get the book? You're not doing book signing today.
No, yeah, I don't. Yeah, we're not doing signing today, are we?
No.
Okay, sorry. So it's available at all bookstores. I know that there's a bookstore here in Baltimore called Greedy Reads. I know they have stock that's signed as well. But it's available online as well, Amazon, bookshop.org as well. But yeah, what's the closest bookstore to like this location?
To here, Greedy Reads isn't too far away, and then trying to think of.
There's a Barnes and Noble at the Harbor, right?
Technically, oh wait, actually, yeah, there is. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. There's a lot of beautiful small bookstores. I definitely, if you're around for a couple of days, check out Greedy Reads. There's one north of here, and there's one south of here. Neither is walkable, but if you look it up, it's just a small, lovely bookstore. The Ivy Bookshop is also very good. Ivy, IVY.
Yeah. So we are coming up on time now. I just had one question.
Yeah.
If you could share what you're working on next.
Yeah. I'm working on a couple things. What can I say? So I write for television as well, and so I have a couple TV series that I'm trying to get made. I would like to turn this into a movie, so we're working on that. And I have another book, a book of essays coming out next fall, I believe. Not this fall. And it's just a book of essays about my life. It's called Congratulations, the Best is Over. It's a happy book, despite the title. So that's that.
Wonderful. All right, well, that's our time today. If everybody could give our guests
thank you very much.
A warm round of applause.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all, our in-person audience, our virtual audience, those of you tuned in. Thank you, and keep up with Pratt Library, prattlibrary.org for all of our future events. Have a good one.